In the Arizona territory, the line between a good man and a dead one was thinner than a whisper. History remembers the gunfights. It remembers the famous names, but it forgets the stories that happened in the silence between the gunshots. This is one of those stories. It's about a Boston school teacher named Isabel Monroe who came west looking for a new life and found a war she never knew existed. And it's about Kalen, the Apache warrior they called the Ghost, the man who took her from the wreckage of her world and made her a spoil of his own. This isn't the story they teach you in school. This is the story of what happens when a captive woman, stripped of everything, is forced to face the soul of a broken man, and what happens when she decides to tame him. The year was 1878. Isabel Monroe was running, not from outlaws or from the desert heat. She was running from a future that felt like a coffin. Back in Boston, her life was a series of closed doors and quiet rooms. Her father had arranged a marriage for her to a man twice her age whose hands were always cold. So she ran. She took a job as a governess for a rancher's children out near Prescott. It was a lifeline, a chance to breathe. The last part of the journey was a stagecoach, a bone-rattling box of dust and misery. The other passengers were ghosts of the frontier, a prospector, a preacher, a young soldier barely old enough to shave. The preacher had warned her. "This is no country for the faint of heart," he'd said. "The Apache watch the roads. Always." Isabel had just smiled, looking out at the endless desert. She had no idea how right he was. The attack came like lightning from a clear blue sky. One moment, there was just the creak of the wagon. The next, the world exploded. A scream tore through the air, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of pure, undiluted vengeance. The driver was the first to die. He just slumped. The coach crashed, splintering into a wreck of wood and metal. Isabel was thrown against the wall, her head striking something hard, the air filled with the taste of blood and dust. The coach door was ripped from its hinges. The men who filled the opening were nightmares made of copper skin and cold fury. Apache. They moved with a terrifying speed. The prospector, the preacher, the young soldier. They were cut down before they could even scream. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. And then he appeared. He moved with a quiet grace that was more terrifying than any war cry. He was taller than the rest, his body a collection of hard, lean muscle. A single eagle feather was tied in his long black hair. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were as black and empty as a desert night, and in their depths burned a fire of ancient hatred. This was their leader. His gaze swept over the dead men as if they were nothing. Then his eyes landed on her. The world stopped. Everything she was, a lady from Boston, a teacher, a woman of faith, it all burned away, leaving only the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. He reached in, his hand closing around her arm like a band of iron. He pulled her from the wreckage, out into the blinding sun and the carnage. The bodies of her fellow travelers were twisted shapes in the dust. He threw her across the back of a pony like a sack of grain and swung up behind her. His body was hard against hers and he smelled of sweat, leather, and something wild. As his war party melted back into the canyons, Isabel looked back one last time at the smoking ruin of her life. In the distance on a high ridge, a lone rider sat on his horse just watching them disappear. Help, she thought. But the rider didn't move. He didn't give chase. He just watched. And in that moment she knew. This wasn't a random raid. It was an ambush. And she had been the target all along. The journey was a blur of sun and rock and pain. The man who had taken her, the one they called Kalen, rode with a terrifying stillness. He never spoke to her. He never spoke to anyone. He was their chief, and his authority was absolute. Isabel was his prisoner, but he treated her with a chilling indifference, as if she were a piece of cargo. When she slumped from exhaustion, he would hold her in place. When her lips cracked from thirst, he would press a water skin to her mouth, but his eyes would be scanning the horizon, always watchful. It wasn't mercy, it was maintenance. The other warriors watched her with contempt. She was a symbol of the white world that was destroying them. One of them in particular, a man with a scarred face named Nuna, seemed to hate her with a special passion. On the third day, they reached the stronghold. It was a hidden village, a natural fortress of stone and pine high in the mountains. Cullen pulled her from the pony and shoved her into the center of the camp. Everyone fell silent. 100 pairs of eyes, all filled with the same burning hatred she saw in his, fixed on her. She was a trophy, and a hated one. She was given to a woman named Taza, whose face was a mask of old grief. Taza led her to a small hut of brush and hide and threw a stack of hides at her feet. She was not a guest. She was a slave. Her life became a nightmare of endless, back-breaking labor. She scraped hides, hauled water, ground corn until her hands were raw, and her body screamed. Her fine Boston dress was soon a tattered rag. Taza gave her a simple deerskin tunic, and with it, the last trace of Isabel Monroe vanished. Callan was a distant storm cloud, always on the edge of her world. He would watch her sometimes, his expression a cold, analytical mask. He was studying her, like a strange creature he couldn't understand. One evening, the loneliness and despair finally broke her. She hid behind a cluster of boulders and wept, silent, body-racking sobs. A shadow fell over her. It was Callan. He stood over her, his face unreadable in the dying light. In his hand, he held a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He didn't speak. He just watched her cry. The inferno of hatred in his eyes seemed to have cooled, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't name. He crouched down, his movements silent and fluid. He opened his hand and let the small wooden bird drop into her lap. Then he rose and walked away, melting back into the shadows. Isabel stared at the bird. It was a simple thing, almost childish, but it was the first human gesture she had received since her capture. It wasn't kindness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of his silence. It was a question, and she had no idea what the answer was. The wooden bird became her secret. She kept it hidden, a small piece of a puzzle she didn't understand. Life in the rancheria continued, a routine of grueling work. But something had changed in Isabel. She began to watch, to learn. She saw the grief in Tasa's eyes and learned that the woman's husband and sons had been massacred by soldiers at a place called Camp Grant. These weren't monsters. They were a people fighting for their lives. Callan remained an enigma. But the cold indifference was gone, replaced by a watchful gravity. The change did not go unnoticed. Nuna, the scarred warrior, saw her as a poison. One afternoon, he blocked her path as she carried water from the spring. "White woman," he sneered, his English broken and cruel. "You make our chief weak." He snatched the heavy clay pot from her shoulder and raised it high, ready to smash it. "Nuna!" The voice was low and dangerous. Callan stood 10 feet away, his rifle held loosely in one hand, but his eyes were locked on his warrior. "She is a witch," Nuna spat. "She softens your spirit." Callan took a slow step forward. He spoke in Apache, his voice quiet but heavy with command. The meaning was unmistakable. "She is mine. You will not touch her." After a tense standoff, Nuna shoved the pot back at Isabel and stalked away. Callan walked over to her. For the first time, he spoke to her directly. "You are not hurt." She shook her head, speechless. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently tracing the blisters on her palm. "These are not the hands of your people," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was a teacher," she whispered. "Words," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Your people use many words. They lie." He gestured to the mountains. "The land does not lie." That night, a fever swept through the camp. Taza's young daughter was burning with it. While the medicine man chanted, Isabel went to work. She bathed the child's head with cool water, coaxing sips of water between her cracked lips. She worked for hours until Callan entered the hut. He stood in the shadows watching her. He finally came forward and crouched beside her. "You have this sickness?" he asked. "No," she said. "The fever must be cooled. She needs water." He watched her, his gaze tracing the lines of her face in the firelight. Then he shifted, pulling aside his shirt to reveal a canvas of scars on his back. Whips, knives, a bullet wound. "My father," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "was killed by soldiers under a flag of truce. My mother and sister taken to a reservation to die. I was a boy. I was taken to a mine. These," he touched his back, "are from the white man's words." Isabel stared at the horrific map of his past, and a profound understanding dawned in her heart. His hatred was a shield. He wasn't a monster. He was a survivor. The last remnant of a shattered family. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and laid her palm against the unscarred skin of his shoulder. A simple touch. An acknowledgement of his pain. He didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes, a flicker of ancient sorrow passing across his face. In the dim light of the hut, with a sick child breathing beside them, the warrior and his captive shared a moment of silent communion, a language not of words but of scars. The truce between them blossomed. Kalen began to teach her the secrets of the desert, the plants that healed, the tracks that told a story. In return, she read to him from her one salvaged book of Shakespeare's sonnets. He would listen, his face unreadable, as she spoke of love and loss. He called the book her Talking Leaves. But the world outside their mountain fortress was closing in. In Tombstone, a new cavalry officer had arrived, Captain Robert Sterling, a man with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a personal vendetta against the Apache. Years earlier, his younger brother had been killed in an ambush. The warrior who led that ambush, Sterling had learned, was Kalen. This wasn't a military campaign. It was a hunt. Sterling's scouts were Tonkawa, rival tribesmen who were paid for every Apache scalp they brought in. His methods were brutal. He didn't chase war parties. He tracked them back to their families. He destroyed their food, poisoned their water. He was hunting the ghost, and he was patient. One day, Kalen's scouts brought news that made the blood run cold. A small band of Mescalero, given sanctuary in their valley, had been found slaughtered. Women, children, old men, all of them mutilated. A message from Captain Sterling. A wave of rage and fear swept through the rancheria. The old hard mask of hatred slipped back over Kalen's face, erasing the man who listened to sonnets. He gathered his warriors. Before he left to seek revenge, he came to Isabel. His eyes were cold obsidian chips once more. "Stay here," he commanded. "Vengeance will not bring them back, Kalen," she pleaded. "It will only create more graves." "It is all we have left," he said, his voice bleak. He was gone for 3 days. When the war party returned, they were not victorious. They were broken. Sterling had set a trap. He had anticipated Kalen's move, and the supply train he attacked was filled with soldiers. The fight had been a slaughter. Sterling was a different kind of enemy. He was smart, he was relentless, and he was getting closer. That night, as Kalen stared into the fire, defeated, a new sound cut through the darkness. A whistle, a signal, not an Apache signal. "Soldiers!" Kalen hissed, grabbing his rifle. "They found us!" Panic erupted. Sterling hadn't been content with his victory. He had followed them. As they ran for the caves, Nuna appeared, his face a mask of fury. He pointed an accusing finger at Isabel. "This is her fault. She is their eyes. She led them here." Before Kalen could silence him, the first volley of shots echoed through the valley. The hunt was over. The siege had begun. The valley became a trap. Captain Sterling controlled the high ground, the only spring. He was content to wait, to let thirst and starvation do his work for him. The Apache were prisoners in their own fortress. Isabel stayed with the women and children in the caves. The cries of hungry children were a constant, heartbreaking sound. She was no longer an outsider. She was one of them. Kalen was a ghost of a man, the weight of his people's fate crushing him. Nuna's accusation had poisoned the camp. Many now looked at Isabel with suspicion. Had she betrayed them? On the third day, the water ran out. That night, the warriors held a council. "We must break out," Nuna argued. "A glorious death is better than dying of thirst." "A breakout is what Sterling wants," Kalen countered. "It would be a slaughter." "Then what, Chief?" Nuna sneered. "Do we wait for your white woman to save us?" For the first time, Kalen's leadership was questioned. "There is another way," Kalen said, his voice ringing with authority. "A path he does not know. The Needle's Eye. A goat path high on the West Ridge." It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. Later, Kalen found Isabel at the mouth of the cave, staring at the soldiers' campfires twinkling in the distance. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "Before you came," he said, his voice low, "there was only hate. It made me sharp. He looked at her, his face a mask of conflict. For me, it is a weakness. For my people, it could be death. He turned to leave, but Isabel stood to face him. There is another way, she said, her voice clear and strong. A better way. He stared at her, a dawning horror in his eyes as he understood what she was proposing. No, listen to me, she insisted. Let me go to him. I am a white woman, a captive. He will see me as a victim. I will tell him you are dead, that the rest of the warriors have fled. He will claim his victory and leave. He will hurt you, Kalen said, his voice a raw, guttural sound. Men like him, they will see you as something spoiled by us. It's a risk I am willing to take, she said, her gaze unwavering. To save your people, to save you. Why? He whispered, the question torn from his soul. Why would you do this for us? Isabel reached up and touched his face. Because my own people showed me cruelty long before I met you. You took me as a spoil of war, but you are the first man who has ever truly seen me. My place is here. In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled. He pulled her to him, his kiss not tender, but a desperate, raw thing born of fear and loss and a love that had bloomed in the harshest of soils. If he harms you, Kalen vowed, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard before, I will burn his world to ash. The decision was made. Isabel Monroe, his captive, his spoil of war, was about to become the savior of his people by walking back into the very world that had cast her out. The plan was a terrible gamble. Isabel's appearance was carefully crafted. A torn tunic, a face smeared with dust, a convincing head wound made from a drop of Kalen's own blood. She was playing the part of the broken victim. Their farewell was a moment of silent agony. Taza embraced her as a sister. Even Nuna gave a solemn nod of respect. Kalen pressed a sharp shard of obsidian into her palm, a silent, deadly promise. Live, Kalen, she pleaded, then a final desperate kiss, a farewell. She stumbled out of the canyon and into the army camp, crying out. She was immediately surrounded, a spectacle, a trophy, and then she was brought before him, Captain Robert Sterling. His uniform was immaculate, his blue eyes cold and precise. You are safe now, Miss Monroe, he said. With tears she didn't have to fake, she told him the lie. Kalen is dead, she choked out, shot by a sniper. The rest, they scattered, fled south. Sterling's face broke into a triumphant smile. He had won. He had avenged his brother. Excellent, he declared. Break camp. The campaign is over. The journey to Tombstone was a nightmare. Sterling paraded her like a prize, his chivalry a thin mask over a predatory gleam. He saw her as an object he now owned, made more interesting by her time with the savages. He housed her in the finest hotel, but it was just another cage. The truth of his nature was revealed 2 nights later. He came to her room, his breath smelling of whiskey, his eyes burning with a possessive fire. You are a remarkable woman, Isabel, he slurred. I am your savior. I am grateful, Captain, she said, backing away, her hand closing around the hidden obsidian shard. Gratitude is not enough, he snarled, his mask of a gentleman vanishing. He lunged, grabbing her arm. That savage filth turned you, but I will burn it out of you. She reacted with pure instinct. She slashed the sharp obsidian across his face. Sterling roared in pain and fury, blood pouring from a deep gash on his cheek. His eyes were filled with murder. You savage whore, he bellowed, his hand dropping to his pistol. But before he could draw, the door slammed open. The town sheriff stood there, his face grim. That's enough, Sterling. Behind the sheriff was another man, in a fine city suit. Captain Sterling, the man said, his voice calm and authoritative. I'm Philip Crane, Department of the Interior. You are relieved of command. He held up a telegram. An investigation has been opened into your methods. It seems scalping women and children is frowned upon in Washington. Sterling stared, dumbfounded, as he was dragged away. His secret atrocities, his war crimes, had come to light. Isabel sagged against the wall, the bloody obsidian falling from her numb fingers. She was safe. She was free. But as she looked out the window at the dark, silent mountains, a profound emptiness consumed her. Kaylin, believing she was safe, was gone. A ghost once more vanished into the wilderness and out of her life forever. The weeks that followed were a blur. Isabel was a hero. Her story was a sensation in newspapers across the country. The brave captive who had escaped the savages. It was all a lie. Philip Crane, the man from the Department of the Interior, arranged for her passage back to Boston. Her father sent a telegram. "Return at once. End this shameful spectacle." The thought of returning to that gilded cage was a death sentence. She refused. She stayed in Tombstone. She became the town school teacher, Miss Monroe, the Apache teacher. A woman who carried a quiet sorrow no one dared to question. A year passed. She lived a life of quiet dignity. But every sunset that set the mountains on fire was a fresh torment. Every night she dreamt of a man with eyes like a desert night. Her lonely peace was shattered one evening. A young student ran to her, his face alive with excitement. "Miss Monroe, I saw it. Up by the old mission ruins. A wooden bird, just like in your story." Her breath caught in her throat. She had told the children a story, an allegory about a silent man in the mountains who carved birds, a private tribute. "Show me," she whispered. He led her to the crumbling adobe walls, and there, hanging from a branch, was a small, newly carved wooden bird. It was his. He was close. He was alive. She stood there as dusk fell, her gaze fixed on the darkening peaks. Was he watching her now? A rustle in the brush. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not Kaylin. Taza. The Apache woman's face was etched with more hardship, but her eyes held the same unbreakable strength. "Isabel," she said. "Taza, you're safe," Isabel cried. "We are safe," Taza confirmed. "We found a new home. We live. But he does not live. He only waits." "What do you mean?" "His spirit is not with us. It is here, tethered to this town. To you," Taza said, her voice urgent. "He saw the soldier chief taken away. He knows you are safe, but he is a ghost now, a chief with no war to fight. His soul is untethered." Taza handed her a deerskin bundle. Inside was a simple, beautiful Apache dress. "He will not come to your world of cages, Isabel, but you are no longer of that world. A choice must be made. Tonight." Taza's eyes lifted to the highest mountain peak, a black silhouette against the stars. "He waits there. He will wait until the morning star rises. If you do not come, he will leave this land and be gone forever." She placed a hand on Isabel's arm. "You taught us that one heart can be stronger than many rifles. Now you must listen to your own." Taza vanished back into the shadows. Isabel stood alone, the deerskin dress clutched in her hands. Before her, the lights of Tombstone, a life of safety, respect, and quiet emptiness. Behind her, the dark wilderness, a life of hardship, uncertainty, and a love that had remade her soul. It was not a choice between two worlds. It was a choice between two halves of herself. She looked from the town to the mountain, and for the first time in a year, her path was clear. Turning her back on the lights, Isabel Monroe began the long walk toward the mountains, toward the waiting ghost, and toward the only home her heart would ever know. Isabel's story is a powerful reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and battles, but a tapestry woven from individual lives of love, loss, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. What do you think? Can a soul truly be tamed, or does it simply find its match in another? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Thank you for watching.